Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good day, everybody. I teach at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. I am also one of the co-founders, not the founder, of an organization called Positive Muslims about 10 years ago. I will try to be as succinct, as brief as possible about some of what I think are the significant, helpful elements that have emerged in our organization since we started 10 years ago. I think one of the huge challenges that an organization that wants to work on the question of HIV and Islam, or wants to work with Muslims and with Muslims who are HIV positive, and wants to continue to locate itself inside the mainstream Muslim community. Now, there are just many communities all clamoring at different points on the pendulum for mainstreamness. All of us know this mainstream. It's a very elusive, these things, but for want of a better word, this mainstream Muslim community. It's enormously difficult. It's very challenging. It's sometimes very simple to become a completely secular NGO, working apart and sometimes doing favors to these religious communities, or to become an entirely religious-based organization, having nothing to do with secular NGO discourse. But to straddle the divide between the two, it's an enormously difficult challenge. You're not only dealing with a community and their set understandings of what is right and wrong. You're not only dealing with your staff members and different stages where they are at in their own growth. But if you take your faith seriously, you're also dealing with your text. And yesterday in our small group, I came up with what I thought was a very useful story in dealing with this dilemma. There is a verse in the Quran that says that there is a cure for honey, there is a cure for all illnesses in honey. And so one person came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and said that I have an ache in my stomach. And the Prophet told him to take honey. And after a couple of days, the Prophet met him again. And how's your stomach doing? He said, well, my stomach is still paining. And after the third time, the Prophet met him and asked him, how's your stomach doing? He said, well, my stomach is still paining. The Prophet said something very curious, or is reported to have said something very curious. Sadaq Allah wa kadhiba batanuk. God had spoken the truth, and your stomach had lied. Now, there is something very difficult at work here. If you are a determined believer in the text, then God speaks the truth. But if you are a physician dealing with this person's stomach, or when you're this person's self, your stomach has also spoken the truth. It's easy for hadith literature to say that your stomach had lied, but the physician knows that your stomach pains, and you know that your stomach has pain. And so in some ways, this has been the dilemma around the question of the HIV and AIDS pandemic. There are certain answers in the text that we feel, that we believe in. And as Muslims, you can't walk away from them. But there are also other elements in our social realities that we clearly see. And as human beings, عيني ولسانه وشفتين, human beings given to eyes and a tongue and lips, eyes to see, lips to affirm and to give witness to, you have to speak. You have to witness and speak. And so one of the elements that we're very good at doing is telling stories to highlight the moral dilemmas that we face as we get caught between the stomach, the pain in the stomach on the one hand, and the honey on the other hand, and the text that says that you must take the honey. So there is Sis Maraldia. She's passed away now. She was a bit of a social worker 30, 40 years ago. She passed away about 20, 30 years ago. And she found that Muslims were abandoning their parents when they were getting old. The nature of civilization was changing. Elderly parents weren't just kept with their families. But the Quran says, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. that God commands that you worship Him and that you look after your parents. If one of them had reached old age or both of them had reached old age, stick with them. وَاحْفَظْ لَهُمَا جَنَاحَ الذُّلِّ مِنَ الرَّحْمَةِ وَقُلْ رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. And look after them, spread your wings of compassion unto them, and say, Lord, have compassion on them as they had on me. The Quran says this. This is the honey. The reality was this, that people were dumping their parents. Sis Maraldia started an old age home for these abandoned parents. The ulama complained. This was a threat against Islam. You are normalizing people abandoning their parents. You are encouraging people abandoning their parents. Sis Maraldia said, look, you've been preaching for years in the mosque that people mustn't throw their parents on the streets. I want you to continue preaching. But for the moment, I, as a social worker, sit with the reality of people being thrown onto the streets. And so we don't answer the question of to condomize or not to condomize. We don't give specific answers on it. But we tell the story of Sis Maraldia. The ulama, Rijal ad-Din, good people, spiritual activists in our community, the ongoing story of abstinence. It's an important story. But at some point, somebody else has to deal with the fact that the story is not reaching. So it's all very well to say, no, keep on pushing the honey. Keep on pushing the honey. It will succeed eventually. Some physician out there's heart breaks at the fact that this man is in deep pain. At the fact that the honey is not working for this man. He may be a Muslim. And so what we have found useful in a series of stories like this that we have developed with moral implications leaves in some ways the answer. We're not into the fatwa making business. So it leaves the answers in the hands of the people that we work with. I don't have time for many of these stories. One other quick one that perhaps talks about us and the NGO industry. There is a woman who stands at a river one day. Steve de Groot, who's passed away recently, first heard the story from him. This woman is at the bottom of a river, and the baby comes down the river. She catches the baby, looks after the baby. After a few days, she's at the river again. Another baby comes down. She catches the baby. She may be a single mother, may have had yearnings for motherhood and so on, really loves these babies. After a while, she sets up a whole industry at the bottom to look after these babies. Mother Teresa multiplied all of these babies. And gets all the religious validation for doing this. We're caring for babies. We're reaching out, we're doing this, we're doing that. A whole lot of feel-goodism in this. And you set up a whole baby looking after a baby carrying industry at the bottom. You become very famous for looking after babies. Now, the hard, but seriously prophetic task is to possibly pause. And in your pause, you may possibly miss a baby that's coming down the river. But the critical and prophetic task is to go up and see who the hell is it that's throwing these babies down. But the task of going up there and confronting the person throwing these babies down, that's not seen as love. That's not seen as compassion. That's seen as activism. That's seen as politics. That's seen as being left. You're angry. And religious people, we're about hugging each other. We're about compassion. We're about love. Reaching out to babies. It's not wanting to have throttle this guy that's throwing babies down from the top. And so in our religious responses to the pandemic, and this is something that we in Positive Muslims have struggled with,